Hi, Stacy here with Limelight AZ. So I was just reading my Bible, Matthew chapter 7, and something kind of interesting came to my attention. I wrote on my Facebook page earlier today a question asking people to post basically things that they thought that made them unique amongst all the rest of my Facebook page friends. So, for instance, I had a friend who, I'm drawing a blank. I'm drawing a blank all of a sudden, but basically, there's something unique that made their lives stand out, and I eventually responded with a bunch of stuff that I had done, including one of them being figured out the art of spiritual warfare. Spiritual warfare is one of those things that is a really tough subject. And I believe, at least at this point, that I've kind of figured out the art of that. And then when I was reading Matthew chapter 7 tonight, something dawned on me. I think the problem for many people that are dealing with spiritual warfare is they can't tell if what they are dealing with is spiritual warfare or something else. If it's spiritual warfare or something of their own doing. Spiritual warfare or God trying to teach them a lesson, spiritual warfare or just a part of a pattern of life events. Instead, all things are lumped into generally being identified as spiritual warfare. And so when I was reading chapter 7 tonight of Matthew, it dawned on me that spiritual warfare is a lot like Lyme disease. Lyme disease, you end up just having your normal I don't feel well days to having days where you're herxing, where the toxins are dying off and causing you to feel worse than you normally do. Where you're having a flare, which is the toxins or not the toxins, the bacteria is more active or is making babies or something along those lines, where it's not, where your symptoms are not the result of a good thing, like herxing. The symptoms in that situation are a result of the bacteria dying, which is a good thing. So flares are the result of not necessarily a good thing. To retracing, which I've mentioned recently, which is a surfacing of symptoms, but it doesn't really fall into either category of herxing or flaring. So I think spiritual warfare is a lot like that. It's hard for people to identify what the cause is. And I think I've been fortunate enough, at least in my own life, to be able to start identifying the cause of the chaos that we are dealing with. So, like everybody else, the first thing that we do is we jump on it's spiritual warfare bandwagon, and assume that it is Satan just trying to kill, steal, and destroy, which is true. That is, he does try to do that, but like with this situation with the Lyme disease, I've been bedridden since January. We've had, and I mentioned recently that we've had one nosedive after the other for a year and a half up until just a couple of weeks ago. And it just didn't make any sense. When we first came to faith, or I did, anyways, so about a year and a half ago is when I was able to pinpoint that our yo-yo lives began, and it wasn't until just recently that I kind of pinpointed what the event was, and I might share that at some point in the future, but I don't think that's a pertinent piece of information for this video right now, and it would take too long to try to explain it. So but the thing was that I kept praying on what was happening in our lives. And I finally got to a point of desperation that I called over the pastor that I went to initially when we first came to faith, to see if he could pray with us, because I had walked through and basically cut ties with a bunch of stuff from my history initially when I first came to faith. And that is what brought our spiritual warfare to an end at that point. And so it seemed like we had been dealing with spiritual warfare for the last year and a half, but we've been pretty good about not bringing junk into the house, about the type of people we're around, not filling our hearts and minds with junk. And I mean, not that we've been perfect about it, but just that we've tried, and we've avoided some of the major things that caused us problems in the first place. And it just seemed like we were going through spiritual warfare, and I kept praying on it and getting the answer of it's preparation for a journey. And I'm like, I don't understand. How the heck am I being prepared for a journey from bed? I can't get out of bed. How does this equate to preparation for a journey? When you think of preparation for a journey, you think of exercising, eating well, and all of that. But I finally, a couple weeks ago, I kind of pinpointed the turning point in our lives that caused the chaos that we were dealing with, and have since started correcting that, and it's cleared up. This was not spiritual warfare like we originally had believed and had kept enduring, and we just hadn't figured it out. And it turns out this was a lesson by God, and that in correcting the issues that we were having, in correcting the issues that we had not changed a year and a half ago, is what fixed our chaotic lives at this point. So essentially, this was equivalent to a flare. Or no, not a flare. This would have been equivalent to a herx, a year and a half long spiritual herx. Where we were almost figuring it out and we were dealing with it, but it wasn't quite there. And it wasn't until we figured out what the problem was that we saw a clearing of this spiritual herx. Where spiritual warfare is more like a flare. It's a increase of activity spiritually that is not healthy for you and is not going to result in anything positive unless God himself uses that. And then, of course, in there's situations like my kids are misbehaving. This is theoretical, not that I'm having issues with my kids. But my kids are misbehaving because of my own parenting, and it being attributed to spiritual warfare. Not everything is spiritual warfare. Sometimes it's God saying, here is a teaching moment. Let's see how long it takes you to figure it out. And sometimes it is spiritual warfare. And sometimes it's just you because of the choices you're making. If you eat bad, you're going to have bad health. If you don't exercise, you're going to have bad health. If you are mean and cruel to people, you're going to have bad relationships. It's not, everything is not necessarily spiritual warfare. And I thought that was pretty interesting to be able to relate it to Lyme and the different symptoms that you get from Lyme versus the different symptoms. Sorry. Anyways, so it's just, I thought it was interesting because I think sometimes it's very difficult for people to figure that out. And it seems that as far as me figuring out the art of spiritual warfare, I have successfully been able to avoid it for the most part since coming to faith. And I think that is due to the fact that one of the things that people do is that they keep screaming at demons, whether they're there or not, and paying attention to them. And people forget why they were created. They were created to worship God. And when Satan gets you to be wrapped up in other stuff, including casting out demons, not that there's not a place for that. Obviously, Scripture talks about casting out demons, and I'm in agreement with that. But that there are some people that are so wrapped up into the spiritual warfare game that they think everything's spiritual warfare and are constantly trying to cast out demons. And Satan's just messing with them. He's got them so tied up in fighting spiritual warfare of their own validity through Christ that they are not doing what they were created for, which was worship. And he's distracting them, and he's getting away with it, So for anybody who's of any kind of interest, I mean, I came from a pagan world that was, when I came to faith, there was a significant amount of spiritual warfare that our family dealt with. I strongly believe in cutting ties from generational curses and from your own things that you've brought into your life and things that you've brought into your environment, and repenting of that, and being thankful for the provisions that God gives us. But from that point on, resist the devil and he will flee. Scripture says that too. And stop, constantly yelling at the demons and yelling at Satan. And if they are there and you've already cut ties with them, they will flee on their own, because the closer you get with Christ and the closer you get with God, the more they don't want to be near you. So stop giving them power by getting you distracted. And resist the devil and draw closer to God. That's the best way to handle spiritual warfare. Cut the ties, cast them out, and then draw closer to God and resist the devil. There you go. A simple formula. Cannot tell you how many people I've told that to that are irritable over the fact that it seems to be so simple. But God does not want us tied up in trying to save ourselves. He already saved us. We don't need to save ourselves. We just need to follow Scripture and do as he said. So, and that includes resisting the devil and letting them flee. So, I don't know. There's my babbling moment. I'm going to bed. I hope everybody has a wonderful evening.